as a speaker, believe that we're moving out of virtual sort of, and we have a real life speaker. Emily Crowell, who's going to talk to you as a wonderful campaign manager. And those of you who went to the league debates in the libraries may have met her. But now she is behind the scenes and she's going to talk about life at City Hall.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
So tell us what you'd like us to know about.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Emily Ward Crowell. I'm the Chief of Staff for Mayor Brett Smiley. I'm very loud. I just want to make sure that you can all hear me, okay?
Oh, yeah.
All right, cool. Tell me if I get too loud or too fast, because I have tendencies to do both. I work in City Hall. I'm the Chief of Staff to the Mayor. Just so you know who I am and where I came from, I was born and raised in Cranston, just over the line. Don't hold it against me. I've been here for about 15 years in Providence. I went to URI and I graduated there. When I first started, I thought I wanted to be a photojournalist. I went to RISD and I quickly realized I did not want to. I did one wedding and I was like, that's enough for me. And typically you do that for a little while when you get started. So then I transferred to URI and I thought I was just gonna do traditional journalism. And I had a really great political science professor in Maureen Moakley. And so I changed course. And so I ended up in political science and I double majored in natural resource conservation. And I don't use that a lot, but political science I use every day. And so then once I left there, I actually worked for Senator Jack Reed for a few years here in his Rhode Island office. I got to work on the coordinated campaign back in 2014. And I loved the pace of it. I liked moving that fast. I liked problem solving that fast. The Senate moves pretty slow. It's very exciting work. You have a lot of resources, but you're not really close to where the actual problems are. So I left the Senate to go after the campaigns to work for Mayor Jorge Alorza. So I worked for him for 6 years and I was his chief of communications. And then I left to go be the chief of staff at the Department of Education during COVID. And so I got to work for Secretary Raimondo for a little while. I reopened the schools. I was there through the transition of power. Got to work for Governor McKee. We got to vaccinate teachers. We set up testing in schools. Got to do all of that. And I stayed there for about a little over a year, and then I went to go work on the campaigns. I'm very much so into 5-year plans, and Mayor Smiley had a 5-year plan that I also admired. So I went to work on his campaign, and I got to do debates across the city and knock on doors across the city and get to hear right from constituents, you know, what the problems were, what the issues were, how the city could do better, hopefully how the city could not do worse. And so get to bring that back to City Hall. So I've been there now since last January. I love my job so much. I have so much fun every single day. I always say I'm never ever bored, and I'm very grateful for it. No matter what you planned on doing that day is not what you actually do. But I work for a very great boss. I worked with some of you in other capacities. I used to be the vice president of Rhode Island Now as well. And so I've done some issue-specific work around organizing at the State House, specifically around the EACA, mainly abortion issues, and some childcare issues. And so that's kind of my background and how I got here. But just a little bit about what I do and what we do at the city. Excuse me. We have a very female staff, so heavy on the ladies, mainly because the mayor gave me a lot of autonomy early on in hiring, and so we brought back some like real MVPs. And so I used to be the chief of communications, now I'm the chief of staff. Our current COO, Courtney Hawkins, she was the head of DHS at the state for a while. Prior to that, she was the chief of policy at the city. Our current chief of policy and resiliency's name is Sheila Dormandy. She used to run the Nature Conservancy, but before that, she was the city's first ever sustainability director. And so when we started out, we were very intentional about bringing people back that had experience in municipal government and had a vision for municipal government and wanted to come back and maybe do it in a different way or a different capacity. And so between the three of us, the whole city trickles down out under us. So in my portfolio is the mayor's office, it's all public safety, it's the canvasser's office, and then it's quite literally any literal or figurative fires that may pop up. All of our intergovernmental and our political work fall under me as well. And so every day toggle between all of those very fun topics. But right now, one of our finance staff is quite literally writing our final budget amendments, and so we're preparing to bring that to finance committee tomorrow. And so part of my job is negotiating the budget with the city council. And so also very grateful that we have a female identifying council president, and a very cool council staff and council composition. And so I work very, very closely with them kind of every day. And so the things that we know as ordinances, as what we call our like city-based laws, we get to kind of reopen those from time to time. Right now we're working on our entertainment ordinance, which is something like, it quite literally says no dancing. So when we took a look at it, we were like, well, that doesn't make sense. And so we're trying to tweak that and make that kind of work better for 2024. And some of these ordinances haven't been touched in 30 or 40 years. And so when you find something like that, you're like, that's crazy. If you have an iPod plugged in, you can't dance. Otherwise, you're in violation of the entertainment rules. So we find fun things like that. So I get to do that all day long. Constituent services reports up to me. And so while all the departments that do the constituent services don't report directly to me, they report to operations, the forward-facing aspect does. So we're rebuilding our 311, which is either the office that you call when you dial 311, or it's the application that you might use on your computer or on a phone, and how you tell us kind of what the problems are. That software hasn't been updated since 2006, so that was something that we started on early. We move very slowly. Government moves really slowly, but sometimes that gives you a lot of time to say, what's wrong with this current system? How do we fix it? So we're undergoing that right now. Our current budget that we're passing is not a sexy budget. The city is in pretty dire financial kind of constraints, but last year we were able to negotiate new contracts with our colleges and universities for the pilot agreement. So pilot is payment in lieu of taxes. I know that doesn't sound sexy, but that's something that hasn't been done in 20 years. And so historic kind of agreement with them, both on what their community contributions are and what they're gonna make in terms of payments to the city instead of paying taxes. They are all tax exempt by federal statute. And so this really was a collaborative effort with them and the council and their representatives to say, what does the city deserve? What do our constituents deserve? And what impact do colleges and universities have on our community? And so that was really amazing to watch the mayor and Courtney do those negotiations. We recently negotiated an FOP, our Federation of Police Officers, our police contract. And so we were able to do really cool things with how they promote within the police department. It was all test taking in the past, and we've been able to kind of move that forward. Now there's an interview process based upon experience, and really bringing that into line with best practices throughout the country. We got to recruit new police officers, and so we changed how we did recruiting. We called places that did really good jobs, just cold called cities and said, how did you do such a good job? Which goes a long way, and like you really hear directly from them. So our Colonel Perez has been our chief of police for about a year and a half, been in about 14 months. And he's amazing. And so we did an open house, and it was just full of Providence-based talent, like our youth that have just graduated, students that came from the school district. And so once we got them all in the room, we learned from other departments that you get to stay in contact with them because it's a really long process. And so pairing them up with officers that we have that look like them, that sound like them, that speak like them, and pairing them up directly with them to make sure that they have someone that was with them throughout the whole process. We offered, do you want to go get in a car and do a ride along? Hi, how are you?
Hi.
That's one of our board campers.
Sorry.
No, good to see you. And so we changed our recruitment process based upon best practices. And Mayor Smiley himself was a chief of staff or Secretary Armando. He was the chief operating officer in the city of Providence. And I always say it's a blessing and a curse to work for a staff person. He's done my job probably better than I will ever do it. But he sets very clear expectations, and he lets me get a little weird and do some really creative stuff. And so I really appreciate the way that he lets us approach our jobs. And gives us guidance. I've never worked for someone who's been in my quite literal shoes and seat before, and so he's able to kind of give me feedback in a way that none of my other bosses have been able to, and so I deeply, deeply appreciate that. Other fun stuff that we're doing, we launched the city's first ever soccer league, which is crazy to say, but our city never had an organized soccer league. That was something that we heard quite literally on like so many hundreds of doors. We would knock on the door and people would say, like, it's really great you have a ton of basketball, but you have no soccer. And so that was something that our new rec director prioritized and really made happen. Our recreation director came from the school department, so he brings with him an education lens, which I deeply appreciate and love. And so we've also done really cool stuff with rec centers that are attached to schools, and launched a pilot program where we're doing half summer learning and half recreation during the day. And it's helped to help these kids that may have been lost a little bit and slid back during COVID to get them back up to speed. And so that was something that he brought from his education background and kind of mixes that with his recreation talent. And so he just does a really great job. That's some of the fun stuff that we get to do. Not a sexy part. We got to increase libraries this year, so we increased our investment in libraries in this past budget. That's something that, like, not a lot of people know how libraries are funded, but they have a large portion of their funding comes from the city. Same with community centers, and so getting to do it again from this job and from a different perspective, just knowing how every dollar goes a long way. And when you're sent into the libraries, it's quite literally spreading throughout the city. I get to work on PVD Fest, which is super fun. I get to work on Pride this weekend, which is super fun. From the really fun stuff to the not so fun stuff, like I quite literally have to map out how we pick up the trash after the Pride parade. So in years past, sometimes they would throw out potato chips. So very nicely asked them this year not to do that, because then the next morning I would be walking around downtown picking up potato chip bags, both to avoid rats and also just because they were everywhere. But so super fun stuff that I get to dig into. Hi, how are you? Other cool stuff that we get to do is right now our city is mostly run on paper. And so you'd be shocked to know how much paper is in those buildings. So we're really working on digitization, and we've invested in digitization. So this next year we're gonna be digitizing a lot more of our documents, just so they live online and they live in a digital format forever and ever. Quite literally, when I go to inspections and standards and ask them, they're handing me a note card. So how we transition that to somewhere that is less flammable is really, really important to us. Working on preserving our archives and other documents as we do this process, but the state's a little bit ahead of us on that. And so they've started their digitization process, so we're trying to catch up to them and do things like that. I could go on and on all day about the boring stuff that I do that I find to be super fun, but I'm also here to let you ask me questions about the mayor's priorities, the work that I do, things that I see every single day, and I'm full of funny stories, so. Yeah.
So we've been following the update of the city's comprehensive plan.
Yes.
And I know the city council has a role to play, but what role does the mayor play?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah. So she asked about the city's comprehensive plan, and so every 10 years we get to do an update to our comprehensive zoning plan. And that quite literally guides the city for the next 10 years. It tells you how high you can build, it tells you what you can build, it tells you where you can build it. And so this is like every decade we do this. It's like a really big deal. And so what our office has done, since we took office, they had given us quite a little head start. They kind of did a framework and some feedback sessions. And so we've toured the city with our planning department to go to neighborhood associations, merchant associations, really try to meet folks where they are to say, what do you want to see in your neighborhood 10 years from now? Because whatever we do now is going to map us out 10 years from there. And so our office was participating in that feedback sessions. The mayor weighs in on the chapters, so there's a chapter for every single kind of department, because zoning really impacts every single department. Like fun things that I've found, I have a commitment that if I find something that's broken, I'm gonna fix it, which I regret. But I try to do it. But early on I started, and I got a call from someone and they said, I'm trying to open a home-based childcare, but because the state law allows for 12 kids and the city law only allows for 8 kids, I have to go get a special use permit, which means I have to hire an attorney, I have to go to the zoning board, I have to request this permit. And I was like, that's crazy. we don't even regulate childcare. We have no idea what that should look like. And so that was one that we felt was such like an immediate, because we're trying to expand the amount of seats in those so that our home-based childcare can actually take in children. So that was something that like I didn't even know lived in zoning. And so when I talk about the entertainment ordinance, that actually lives as part of zoning, where you can have outdoor entertainment and where you can have indoor entertainment until what time lives in zoning. And so zoning actually kind of oversees a lot more than we think. And so I find it to be fascinating. But so right now we have it and we're handing it off to the CPC, the City Planning Commission, and then they're going to take up the matter, weigh in on it, and vote on it. And then they send it to the Providence City Council for review and adoption.
So the mayor has already had the input that he's
Yeah,
gonna have.
yeah, this kind of year. Yes, sir.
I'm Tom Padwell from Warren.
Yeah.
And I work with the Kennedy Plaza Resilience Coalition.
Uh-huh.
And this is an issue that is, of course, statewide, but Providence is deeply concerned in this. Our push is to see that with all these millions being spent around RIPTA, the bus hub stays in Kennedy Plaza where it belongs.
Uh-huh.
I know the city council has weighed in on that with a sense motion that it should remain there. Not binding, but
A resolution, yeah.
yeah, great. But as I said, RIPTA is a statewide issue, and the riders coalitions and the I've lost their proper name, but the coalition of transit riders,
Yeah, RIP transit, right.
right, wants to see that all these millions that are spent, great, let's spend it improving Kennedy Plaza. So that's just throwing that out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to accept that. We're participating in the process right now with the P3 that was selected by the state to do that process. And so they're doing community engagement right now and we're participating in that. I actually ride I don't drive. So I go straight down Angel Street and get into the plaza that way. I'm very lucky that one of my coworkers lives right over the bridge. The Henderson Bridge, not the other bridge.
Not the bridge we don't talk about.
When you do town comprehensive plans, one every 10 years. So when you look at the one 10 years ago, I mean, it's kind of like a wish list too, in a way.
It is.
So do you ever go through it and like after 10 years and say, well, that was accomplished, that wasn't, that was looked at, you know, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so can you use that, you know, we didn't achieve it in the last 2 or 3 comprehensive studies, can we, you know, really, you know, give it
It's a priority.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where they start. So they start with the old plan to look at that plan to say what has been done, what worked and what didn't work. There was a lot around self-storage places, and so there's a moratorium on that now, but like our old plan very specifically spoke to them to say where they should go and where they shouldn't go. And over the course of 10 years, residents have said, we haven't. And so that was one that kind of like, that last plan said, put them here and not here. And now we've heard from people that there's enough of that. And so the city council kind of has a moratorium. You're already there, you're fine. But no new self-storage sites. And so that's an example of something that like, they originally were just speaking to where, and now very much so it is Providence has enough places to store.
Just know that they at least go back and
Yeah.
like comparisons, like what did, what
Yep.
worked and what didn't.
Yeah, I'm very grateful.
10 years later, it's a totally different
Totally. Yeah.
timeline.
We just did a staff survey of non-union staff we started with, and the average response was 20 plus years that people had worked with the city. And so a lot of the folks that are working in our departments have been there through several administrations and are able to say to me, when I come in with what I think is an amazing idea, they're able to say, we tried that, it didn't work because of this. Or we haven't tried that, because I can say, have we tried this? And they're like, no, I don't think we have. And so I'm really grateful that there's been so many people that have been there to see maybe 2 comp plans, not just 1 comp plan, and what worked and what didn't work. Yeah.
I don't know if you had a chance to talk about it. Can you talk a little bit about school years?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, in just like the comp plan, we also update our city charter every once in a while. And so, in 2022, on the ballot, voters elected to change the composition of our school board. Right now, it's 9 folks, and they're appointed by the mayor through a school nominating committee. And so you all actually help us with our school forum every year. With our forum every year with the nominating committee. And so folks apply, they come to a forum, they answer questions. This year we took questions from other organizations as well. We had more participants and applicants this year actually than I've ever seen in my whole time.
And better.
Yes, very highly qualified. It was a really, really good group of folks. For just a few spots too, and that's part of it. Like, cause every few years.
She moderates.
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
And,
Leave people time to, but really, the quality of the applicants was so much better.
and also the mayor came.
Yes, and it was the first time, and the mayor stayed.
Yeah.
It was the first time a mayor has said, oh,
Yeah.
no one comes, and staying. But of course, now, that was the next question, now that we're going to this, is the city ever getting control, and what is the school department board going to do, and what is going to happen to the state, what's happening?
Yeah, I'm gonna finish on the elections and then I'll tackle that bad boy. So on the hybrid school board rather, the composition changes. And so it will be 5 appointed and 5 elected. And so the city council works to divide the city into 5 districts. It's pretty much just like every 3 wards gets lumped into a district. And so 1, 2, and 3 are in one district. There's 15 of them. It was easy math. But so there'll be 5 districts and people will run for a seat from those 5 districts. And so they do have to declare by June 24th. Yeah, okay. They have to declare by June 24th for their candidacy. And then they'll run, and it's not partisan, and there's no term limits. And so they'll run, and there'll be an election in November for that. And so we're trying our best. The canvassers did an open house to explain to people. There's a voter's guide to explain to people, because a lot of folks that are interested in school board may have never run for office before. School board, and you see in a lot of other cities and towns, is really like one of the first stepping stones for people to get engaged and involved and run for office. And so that will change. There'll be 10 people on the board. The mayor will still have 5 appointments. We got a legal opinion, and so everyone will be resetting this year. We couldn't find a clean, fair, and legal way to transition the current board members off. And so we will have everyone reapply that wants to be on the school board, and we're gonna do that process all over again later this year. And I'm sure Matt will talk to you about what the forum will look like, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of applicants. It's after the election, so we might see some of the folks that didn't win apply to try to participate in that way, which I would expect. But on where we are in the schools, so I was lucky enough to start the city when the schools were first taken over, and I was at the Department of Education. So I have a pretty good understanding of education in Providence and Rhode Island. We're currently in a state takeover. So the state controls the finances and the operations of the schools. And so the school board and the mayor don't have that operational authority anymore in the way that we used to have. And so by the Department of Education's own regulations, they're in a review. And so after 5 years of a turnaround, they're required to do a review. They just promulgated some regulations. I was just interviewed last week to see how it's going, to get a pulse check, and to kind of interview everyone that's involved. And so that's what the Department of Education is doing. The city has a return to local control cabinet, and so it's the mayor's office, the city council office, school board members, and we convened early on both to weigh in on those regulations, but also to say what needs to happen for us to responsibly take the schools back. And so I was there for the divorce, and I plan to be there for when we reconcile, but a lot of things happened. Some of it's really wonky, like now we have 2 benefits departments, we have 2 controllers, one for the schools, one for the city, and so there's some mechanics there as to how do we mesh that all back together. We still provide some services to the district, but not at the level that we used to provide. So if we were to become one again, there would be some redundancies, and so we're trying to right now operationally figure out what that looks like. We also looked at the turnaround action plan, and so the school district developed a turnaround action plan when they went under the takeover that has about 32 goals. we really leaned into the ones where the city can impact. So improving attendance, providing tutoring in spaces outside of schools, so either in our recreation centers or through programs like PASA, the Providence After School Alliance, to really make sure that kids, when they're outside of the school, which is where our kind of responsibility lies, they're getting high quality education opportunities. And so we looked at 8 of them. We found 8 of them that we said we can influence as a city without the schools, without the powers that the mayor used to have. These are things that we can help with. To try to move the needle on some of those things. And they were considered power metrics by the turnaround action plan, so they're kind of like the most important things that will really improve outcomes for kids. I don't know if folks saw the news, but we worked with the city council recently to increase the contribution from $133 million to $135.5 million. So that came out today. That happened in our budget negotiations with city council. So that typically happens, and the numbers move around a little bit after the mayor presents his budget, and then the city council passes a final form. And so that actually just happened last night into today, and kind of was enacted. And so we send over that money, but we don't have control over where it's spent.
Why don't we end on pensions?
Pensions?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, we all went to all those meetings where we were told we had to approve a bond issue.
Yeah,
To pay
the
for,
POD.
yes, to pay for debt.
The
And
pension
it's-
obligation bond, yeah. Yeah, so that was an initiative by the last mayor, by Mayor Lorsa. And so if the conditions were appropriate, I think Mayor Smiley would take advantage of that bond. We continue to make all of our pension payments on time. Our pension is slightly improving, but the mayor has talked pretty broadly about other ideas for our pension troubles. Right now, we're in a moment where our COLAs kick back in. And so the last agreement caused the COLAs, the cost of living adjustments, and so those continue to go up every year. So our pension payments go up every year. They don't drop off back down until 2040, which is when the fund is expected to be funded at the appropriate amount, a stable amount. And so right now, our biggest job is to continue to make our payments on time and to make sure that the funds are healthy. But there's ideas outside of the pension obligation bond that folks have had to move into the state system, which is also performing pretty well, and to see if we can all come together, well, first, but like the state system, and that we would all be one pension system. Right now, all of our teachers are in that system. So there's other cities and towns that have joined that system instead of running their own systems and paying for their own. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And so we've tried to kind of think through that. It also, when we had our pilot conversations, it was a big part of the conversation to say these costs are gonna go up every year, and the city's largest revenue is property taxes. We don't wanna have to increase property taxes that same percentage every year, so how do we diversify our revenue? So the mayor has submitted some legislation that's pretty creative. We had one that was around a payroll tax. So we all pay payroll taxes anyways, but that goes to the state. And so we had proposed legislation that for new jobs created, not current jobs, the city would get a portion of that payroll tax, and that would kind of incentivize us to put that into the pension to stabilize its new revenue, but also to expand, allow the schools and universities to expand without it always being an antagonistic relationship, because there would be a mutual kind of beneficial agreement and situation where when they grew, we would see some of that. Right now, we don't get any of the payroll tax at all. So that was kind of a creative way to start chipping away. It would be small now, but a lot of these schools in their strategic plans have pretty big projected growth. And so when their workforce would increase, their contribution to the city.
I need one more question. Emily can go home and.
Homeless, the whole homeless in the housing, not in the affordable housing.
Yeah. It's a really big issue. That's a national crisis, but also a statewide crisis. So we see a large portion of services provided in Providence, so we feel that problem, particularly in our city. We were grateful at the beginning. There was some ARPA dollars, so that's the federal dollars that came in from COVID. We designated the majority of the dollars that were left over for flexibility in order to either do housing support, so traditional housing, or to do homeless supports or behavioral health supports. And so we've tried to address this from a few different angles. The mayor's position is that the best thing that we can do is build units at every single price level to alleviate some of that rent push that we're all feeling down upward. And so if we have more affordable units, that will kind of spread the rent out a little bit right now. I know that rent is incredibly high everywhere, but I know that our community feels it deeply. And so that's kind of the housing portion of that piece. And then there's support. So the city hires a few different agencies to help work with us. And so they go out and they make sure that folks are in the system in a way that they're on the kind of like on a list to get a bed or maybe a transitional housing opportunity or something like that. But there's also a deep need for housing that doesn't exist yet. And so that might be folks that have severe behavioral health issues or folks that have substance use challenges. And so that housing might not exist yet. And so as a city, our job is to advocate for that housing to be created, whether through our dollars that we put into the Consolidated Homeless Fund or through state dollars. And so we've tried to address that in some other kind of creative ways. We instituted an EMS bike detail, and so our fire department is quite literally like an EMS department nowadays. And so they respond to less fires and they do 911 calls for health issues, and it might be behavioral health. And so we have both a paired response unit where we send out either a police or a firefighter and they go out with a clinician, or we have our EMS bike details who are quite literally biking around downtown or biking around Broad Street and just checking in on folks. Because some of these folks are a little bit resistant to traditional housing opportunities, and so making sure that they have the Narcan that they need or the medical supplies that they need. And they can triage on site some very basic medical care, but sometimes these folks need more advanced medical care. So do we need to call an ambulance for them? And so that's been really creative. We've never seen that anywhere else, and we're seeing it's really welcomed. It's been really successful. They also are just kind of out there and acting as folks that are riding the bus or something. They're there for kind of questions, and I get to see them from my window every day, so I see them, watch them, live them on their bicycles. They're getting their workout.
Okay. One final. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We go today and have a barbecue picnic.
Oh, I'm okay. I'm gonna go back and do work. It's okay.
Oh,
I love it. It's okay.
By the way,
Yes.
why, when the rescue squads call, do 2 fire trucks come?
Yeah.
And possibly a battalion chief or somebody else.
Yes.
I look at it on my street, I live in a kind of calm street,
Yeah.
and we get these people, you know, I don't get cold. I don't have a standing pension. I know the retired battalion chief on the street is still complaining about his possibly he's not getting. Pretty low. So what's with all these ancillary?
Yeah. So every single firefighter is medically trained to provide BLS, which is basic life support.
Yeah.
And so the simple answer is we don't have enough ambulances. And so a fire truck comes first because all of those firefighters are equipped. And sometimes you might not need an ambulance. And so they had to recently call an ambulance for me, and I could have just been, I have epilepsy. And so when they arrived on scene, traditionally with a seizure, they could have dealt with me with just the firefighters that were on the fire truck. And so depending on the call and how the call came in and where the call came from, you might see 1 or 2 trucks.
And but basically I'm seeing rescue squad plus the trucks plus the battalion.
And so it's
It's like a big part.
yeah, so in this case, normally the fire truck would have been able to deal with my issue, but I had chest pains. And so they had to then call an ambulance to get the ambulance on site. Because of their CBA, their contract, they do have to have either a battalion chief or a supervisor that responds. We have not had a chance to negotiate that contract with them. But that's kind of why you see multiple trucks responding in one. They're all equipped to deal with the situation, but I needed an ambulance. I needed to be brought to the hospital. I was fine. A fire truck cannot.
No, but a rescue squad. And I'm seeing the rescue squad showing up for us.
Yeah, they're calling out at the same time, so sometimes they're not coming from the same area. Our chief actually just did an amazing thing, and so our fire chief, Chief Silva, has remapped the routable maps, and so they used to be in quads, and so the closest you were to that quad touch point, you would get called in. It's now quite physically where you are closest to that truck. And so you should see a reduction in redundancy by quite literally the GPS. And I know it sounds common sense, but it hadn't been in practice then. And so you're kind of seeing that. But I had mentioned earlier, like quite literally, our departments are providing, our firefighters rather, are providing that level of medical care. And sometimes they may arrive on scene and say, I can't handle this. I need an ambulance for X, Y, and Z purpose. They need an IV or something like that. But that's kind of where you'll see that, and it is required by their contract that either a supervisor or that chief level are responding to that.
So it's a contract.
Somewhat, yeah. Yeah.
Good luck renegotiating that.
They're great, I will say.
Well, thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you all for having me. I'm gonna leave some of my business cards in case you all have follow-up questions or anything like that.
Oh, good.